Hello everyone, welcome to Spinning Iris. This is part 3 of BookTube Spin Tag number 3 reviews. This is the first banned book on the list. As you can see, it's 13 Reasons Why by J. Asher. And I thought for this particular one, I'd do 13 thoughts. Number 1. I don't think this is a book that I would have chosen to read myself. In fact, I know for a fact it's one I would not have chosen for myself. I've been to Barnes & Noble, I've picked up this book before, looked at the back, said, put it back, and moved on. Had I been required to read this in school, for school reading, sure. If it was on a suggested summer reading list, I would have passed over it, probably. By high school, my reading was, I guess, leaning more towards adult fiction, more classics and more of the gothic and science fiction. I wasn't really into much realism at that time. The only reason I read it now is because it's a banned book, because it's in the top 5 of the most banned books of the last decade. It's number 3, in fact. And I've already read number 1. Number 2. As I was reading, I kept wondering to myself, not so much why, but how Hannah was making her tape recordings and whether that would ever be addressed. And yeah, it kind of was. Copying CDs onto a cassette tape is pretty easy. Recording a voice requires a little bit more tech, especially in a microphone. Thankfully that was brought up and addressed. The details were vague enough to keep the flow of the story. Number 3. Also, how long are the tapes that she was using? 90 minutes? 60 minutes? Are they those wonderful 120-minute tapes? Are they new tapes, or is she recording over an old used LP transfer? Relax, I'm nitpicking here. Number 4. After reading 13 Reasons Why, I didn't have that sort of sad yet satisfied feeling I usually get when I finish a good book, nor did I have that rage-filled relief that I get when I finish reading a particularly bad book. The only way I can describe how I felt when I finished was it left me in a weird mood. It's like I had a dark cloud over my head all day, which wasn't great because I was at work when I finished it. And it didn't go away until I listened to a funny podcast on the way home. I needed to balance that darkness with something light, which there's not much light in this novel. And the light that is in there is just tinted with uncertainty. Number 5. What's funny is because the feelings I had for 13 Reasons Why I discovered were very similar to feelings I had towards The Scarlet Letter and Catcher in the Rye. I'd even go so far as to say 13 Reasons Why is a direct descendant of these two novels. All 3 are about characters in essentially psychological crisis, featuring destructive behaviors, and all 3 have their own degrees of frustration for me as a reader. Number 6. I'd say the 2 main characters, Hannah and Clay, are good representations of teenagers. I saw pieces of my teenage self in them. I was never depressed. Example, like Clay being good and studious, but I never got invited to any of the parties that were described in this book. And kind of like Hannah, I did use writing as a sort of self-therapy. Although I wouldn't call what I was necessarily writing poetry, more like a brain dump of thoughts, feelings, and questions. Again, never depressed, nor suicidal. Just sorting out my anger and frustration. Number 7. I'm also really glad the novel is not solely from Hannah's perspective. Clay's reactions, responses, and memories help flesh out the story more. It helps me as the reader stay involved with what's happening in the narrative. and paints a broader picture of some areas that wouldn't be detailed if it was just Hannah talking, telling her story. Number 8. Nope. 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 Now that I've had plenty of time to think about this book and all the details in the book, I am not satisfied with the explanation for the tapes. Spoiler warning. Dear Mr. Asher, you grew up in the 80s and 90s, correct? Have you never copied anything to a cassette tape before? Because I have. And you don't need an old tape recorder to transfer music on a CD to a cassette tape. Nor do you need special equipment to transfer LPs to cassettes either. All you need is a stereo system with a cassette recording function. It's very easy. So Tony's explanation about using an old tape recorder just... Or was Tony copying MP3s to a cassette tape for some reason? Because, yeah, I'm pretty sure there is a workaround for that as well. Because, hey, it's the early aughts. All you needed is one of these. Plug it into your MP3 player, shove it in the cassette deck, and you're good to go. So again, why is he using his dad's old tape recorder? So when I hear old tape recorder, I'm thinking like the little handheld ones that use these teeny tiny little cassette tapes. As for voice recording, again, you need a big bulky machine with a microphone like this, or is Tony using a Talkboy to do recording? Is he holding this up to a CD player and going record, record, record? Granted, these were great recorders. I would just love to know what bulky piece of ancient 1980s tech was Tony giving to Hannah to do her recordings. What bulky piece of plastic was she carrying around in a backpack? And how was she making those second copies? That's not impossible either. It's not. But I would love to know how she, the character in the book, is doing this. Because in order to make a second copy, you can't do it silently. It has to be playing while you're recording it. So she's listening to herself telling her story. It just... Or is this some piece of technology I'm not aware of that records 2 cassettes at the same time? And again, that thing must be massive. So she's either using this giant piece of ancient tech recording 2 things at the same time, or she's recording it on a stereo that she must have in her house. All I can think of is her running around with a giant tape recorder and a microphone, and at the end goes speaking into the backpack, okay, I'm doing this now. I'd be very concerned if I saw somebody walking down the hallway talking into their backpack. Also, another question about the tapes. It said they arrived wrapped in bubble wrap. Were they naked tapes like this, or were they in their cases? If they were not in their cases, why were they not in their cases? As somebody who recorded CDs to cassettes because they did not yet have a good working portable CD player, these can be very fragile. They get dirty, they crack, they warp, they break. It's a good thing in the book it wasn't summertime because they might have melted. Just imagine little plastic bubble wrap melting onto this very fragile tape. The why she's using tapes doesn't matter. It's an interesting idea. But for me, it's like these unanswered questions and details, they just constitute this large plot hole for me. A substantial plot hole. And again, I know this is a nitpick, but literally I'd be reading and these questions would creep back into my mind. How is she doing this? How was she recording this 2 times? And it affected how I read this book and how I ultimately responded to it, because I kept getting pulled out of the story because of these. Okay. Rant over. Number 9. The style and layout of the novel is unique. It's well-paced. What would normally be chapters are tape sides, although it did prompt my thought number 3 about the length of the tapes, because that would give a better clue as to how much time is actually passing for Clay as he's listening to them. Number 10. Some of the shouting points on the cover, like thriller pacing, suspenseful, addictive. I mean, sure. As someone who's read their fair share of thrillers and suspense and mystery, even by high school, I'd say this novel is a good introduction to those styles. Pacing, yeah, the pacing is really good. It does keep you engaged, as long as you're not getting distracted by tapes. Eerie, beautiful, devastating. It does have its eerie moments, and the ultimate story is rather devastating. Number 11. With how heavy the story is and the writing, I'm glad that there is a glimmer of hope at the end, a chance at some redemption for Clay and his missed opportunity with Hannah, and I'm glad it ended the way it did. Number 12. While preparing this review and thinking about this novel, my thoughts turned to people who I know or know of who have attempted suicide, and in one particular case succeeded. This section might not be for everybody, so please, if you are not comfortable, skip ahead. One instance I discovered, it was a coming out letter for a family member, where they mentioned no attempt, just an admission that there was contemplation of ending their life. Another one, another YouTuber that I've followed for many years now, made a video where he talked about his own experience with a thankfully failed attempt at suicide. The title is very clickbaity. In fact, I thought it was a joke when I first saw it, but then I clicked on it and it is definitely not a joke. And props to him for him being in a good mental space to be able to sit down and talk about his own experience. And the third is actually the one I thought about first while reading this novel, because this was an attempt that did not fail. It was a former manager of mine for a couple of years before he got promoted and transferred out of our location. He was very quiet, he was very professional, friendly, probably one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. Definitely one of the nicest managers I've ever had. We weren't close or anything, it was just colleagues, you know? 4 or 5 years later, actually now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure it was 2017 when it happened. I think he'd gotten promoted again to upper management, and they were visiting our location. I wasn't there that day when they were visiting, but the people I work with, when they told me that he was there, they said they were so happy to see him again, that everything seemed okay. He seemed okay. We were all happy for him, all proud for him. The next day I come into work, think back, and there was a sort of a weird mood in the air. And we were all called to a morning meeting, and we were told that he had taken his life that night before. No details, of course. It was a shock. It was devastating. And it was rather difficult to work that day. There was a lot of tears that day. I remember one of the colleagues I was working with very closely that day, and I remember overhearing others also. The question that kept running through everybody's mind and verbally uttered was, why? Why would he do this? Everything seemed fine. Why? I mean, all we could do was question and guess. And I also remembered this about him as well. my mind went back to this. When he had first started, it was mentioned that he had been stationed in Afghanistan. He was a veteran. And that made me think that maybe there was some either undiagnosed or untreated post-traumatic stress, or maybe even some depression. And I'll never know. And, it's not okay, but it's okay. Thanks to this book, I got to think about it some more. Because, whether we know it or not, we all know somebody who's been in a dark place, perhaps needed help. That's probably one of the best things about this book, is it does make you think about that sort of thing. 13. I had done preliminary research on 13 Reasons Why before I started reading, and I noticed that a lot of the current challenges and a lot of the challenges and bannings that have been publicly shared all coincide with the Netflix adaptation. Whoever's idea it was to adapt this novel should probably be slapped. I already know the reasons why there is a fuss over the show. I'm curious to see for myself, and just sort of how it's presented, as well as how faithful to the text it is. Alright. Oh, thank you for listening to my 13 thoughts on 13 Reasons Why. We'll come back with part 4 of the BookTube spin tag. Goodbye, Light. And that one will hopefully be not quite so sad. Alright, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'll put some links in the description if you need help, if you need to talk to somebody. Please talk to somebody. Take care. Bye-bye.